Hello. Thank you for visiting and joining me in our dual part today of panicking while I put this together and going over a question that was asked me. We have two different objects, and we'll see if I can manage to do both at the same time. I would question that. In the conversation that we're going to have and the discussion I'm going to present, it's a contested theory that I was asked about by one of my peers at the college, which is on VARK or VAK, which is either video audio kinesthetic or visual audio read write and kinesthetic. Sometimes social is thrown in there. It is a part of the VAK or VARK modality, although it is not always represented in all of the tests. It's a controversial theory. It's tested in parts, and so I wanted to present some of the research and also talk about some of the experiences I've had with it. At the same time, we need to bring in a couple more narcoleptics in the game so that poor Catalina is not all alone here trying to do this. The farm is up and working. We need to get some of the things planted, and I really need to find some more water because this water won't last very long. So those are our two objectives. I have two duplicants which died, sadly, and so that has also put me somewhat behind of where I need to be. So this is our goal for this for this one. Okay, I'll get this part started, and I think I'm going to use this tool over here to make sure we're harvesting here. And we're harvesting over here. And then I need to get over to this water. So we're going to dig out a little section here. This will also free up this pip. Not only are the pips nice and cute, but they will plant seeds for us, which can be helpful, especially since we only have one at this moment. And I'm also going to dig out this food. And dig out the oxygen plant and harvest this group. So that's what hopefully she'll be able to do. This will get our oxygen going, and hopefully it'll fix this problem that we have. I actually, looks like I made a mistake because, yes. So I'm going to remove this tile. And this one over here, because I'm going to put in airflow tiles so that this oxygen, which is down here, can travel up into the base. And I also need to have oxygen, which I'll do with an airflow tile in these rooms. As always, if you're interested in seeing the gameplay or you're interested in the gameplay is oxygen not included. It's an management game. It's not really billed as education, but I find it to be a challenging use of logic and experimentation. And I only have the one water. So, and I'm going to dig this out. Okay. So while she's busy doing her stuff, let me just introduce a little bit of the concept of VARK or VARK and VAK, which is VAK. Excuse me. We're going to mostly talk about, both models are under Niel Fleming. We're going to mostly talk about VARK. It seems to be more representative in the literature, but the models are used interchangeably sometimes in research. The reason it's contested is largely due to the question of whether it's as valid as it once used to be. It was originally thought that for teachers that wanted to help people, particularly students, be able to learn material, that they would go to either the student's preferred mode of accessing material, which in visual is usually pictorial, or some sort of combination of drawings, word arts, and that's where some of this use of like a word wall, which is essentially the first two videos that I did on content of the research tree and the truck that shows the theory, is you're just putting words up, you're making it into some sort of picture, and if you have a visual modality that is a framework for how you acquire this information, that you'd be more likely to remember that kind of material. If you were in the audio, you're more interested in hearing it. And if you're in the read-write, you're looking for both being able to write down notes and reading material and understanding what that material is when you read it. And then the K, which is the kinesthetic, is your ability to be able to prioritize and be able to learn from your body being able to do it, what is colloquially known as muscle memory. I have no narcoleptics, and I'm going to I'm going to stay with my idea, but I will get her a cool suit to wear. Okay, so now she can wear a neat suit and do all the work on the base. Okay, well, I'm just gonna kind of try to let her catch up here on anything at this point. I think I'm going to disable the research at the moment because I need her to get some of this other stuff done. So I'm going to put down in this area here the acronym of VARK to play for a little bit so that it is something that you can remember and get to see while I'm going through this. Now, one of the reasons that it's contested is there's been some studies that have shown, and I'll mention one of them a little bit later, that one of the areas that people may find that they don't have a representative testing of VARK is in either cultural, there seems to be some age that is combined in there, and it's not really very well understood how much those other areas play into effects. As an example, when I was in college, it was considered, even when I took my master's degree, it was considered that as a teacher you could give some sort of a test, a pre-assessment test essentially. At that time, the official language is called a formative assessment, and the formative assessment would allow you to know the students and how they would able to learn and do material, and then I could change the way that the class is taught to get people there. If I had a class that of 30 people and 25 were high auditory learners, then a lecture would be more effective. In general, I had kinesthetic and visual, and so they needed to see some sort of pictures or diagrams or movies or something. Kinesthetic was difficult because I was a classroom teacher teaching either the basics of computer hardware or Photoshop or 3ds Max. And so I tried to do role play, things that would help them learn, and it was successful to a certain degree, but maybe not for the reasons that it was attributed to at that point. And that's because it's not really understood how well VARK works in being able to acquire information. And that's really what the learning modality of VARK is. Now, there's other competing theories, and if you're interested in the subject, you can leave a comment below and I will touch on those competing theories. I think there's 6 or 7 popularized in the academic literature that competes with the VARK model. It is worth noting that even though the model is contested, it is also contested largely on the idea that an instructor will not be able to use this to evaluate students. It is not contested from the viewpoint of critical thinking. Having a class that teaches each of the ways we acquire information is in generally a successful way to do it, and it's also a successful way to do studying. Later in this series, I'm going to do a content video, probably 3 or 4 weeks out from now, on studying. A lot of times when I see studying from the viewpoint of tips, either what you can eat, make sure you eat antioxidants, for example, or make sure you get a good night's sleep before testing, or one that is hotly contested by the students, which is that cramming does not work. And we actually can prove that it does not work in scientific tests. However, students feel that it does, and so it's still with us. And students will argue with me. No, I'm sure that it works. Well, I'm here to say that, at least as represented by the science, it does not. However, when we do studying, it is a good idea to do studying based on a permutation of the VARK model. And the reason for that is that the VARK model uses all of our senses. So if you look at visual, that's your eyesight. If you look at audio, there's your hearing. If you look at kinesthetic, there's your sense of touch. When you're looking at reading and writing, again, it's your visual. And so the 5 senses, smell's kind of left out of there, but the 5 senses, I guess the 4 that we typically will use, will end up being a useful way to be able to gather information. The other one, of course, that we don't actually use in this is taste. So we typically use in school the touch, and you'll use the hearing and the visual. There's a lot of emphasis in the VARK model on learner preference. How do people learn information? And when we talk about learning this information, we're really looking at it from a understanding of acquiring this information. I have found, and I've talked to other teachers about it, I've given formal teacher seminars on it, that oftentimes, and I'm just as guilty as others, that we do not use the term learn correctly. The educational tiers for being able to actually learn information is acquiring information, processing information, memorizing information. As we pass information between our processing centers and our memory centers, that's where the application of the information goes. But the first step in that model is to be able to acquire the information, and that is what the VARK is in, is how to acquire the information and get it into your head. The VARK model that Fleming put together is very specifically not about how you're going to process information, which is actually intelligence. Many times people will say, I'm not intelligent because I can't learn something. That is rarely the truth. What they have is a difficulty learning under certain areas. So if I have, for instance, hard of hearing, well, then I may have a problem in understanding lectures because that material doesn't come in. I may find it more useful to have recorded lectures that I can put on closed captions for, or watch movies on the subject that I can do closed captions for. I may need the teacher to be looking at me so that I can help read the lips for clues, so I may have to adjust, and that burden is on me to adjust where I'm going to sit. The teacher can certainly help, but in higher education, at least, the burden is really on the student being able to understand more and be able to work with their difficulties. And the reason that it's on the learner is that when you go into a corporation, you also have to have some reason that they want to hire you. If I go to the corporation and I say, I really want to work for you, but I need you to do a laundry list of 30 things in order for me to work with you, they're probably not going to hire me. That's not discrimination, it's because I'm not qualified for the job. So I have to have a way to be able to do that. And it's a good idea to take responsibility anyway for actions, I tend to think. It occurs to me on this game that I can't turn off the power like I did because I'd also turn off the oxygen. Well, okay, let's enable that building again, but we'll keep the science off for the moment. Okay. In 2019, Stephenson wrote a research paper, I'll put it down in the links below, that looking at the VARK model, it was questionable whether teachers could actually assess correctly students and whether students could actually assess students on the model correctly. However, it also highlighted that among accounting students, because that's what the study was over, there was a question of the tests were generally given in multiple choice format. If the instructor is giving some sort of assessment that wants to know how the students are learning, what their preferred ways of learning, but the tests are always staying in read and write, then there's a problem linking between material and with testing. One of the things that I advise students when they're studying is to study in the same realm of the VARK model that the test is in. If I'm studying a lot of pictures and I go to a multiple choice test, that doesn't necessarily help me. I may have learned the material, but I may not be able to order it correctly into a test. For students, I have to say that once you get to a certain part of your degree, typically around your third year of a bachelor's degree, your multiple choice tests largely go away. For me, postdoctoral, I still run into a few at licensing tests, but I really don't, and I suppose also some of the teacher assessments that are required by the college. But once you've passed your third year, pretty much everything is essay. Even math problems typically are will become projects and essay based, because you have to be able to explain where the work came from. And even if you don't have an essay, if the teacher is asking to show the work, the chances are you're in a essay-like format where you're showing what is the work and where is it coming from. And I know that students don't always like to show that. They just want to get to the answer in whatever their subject is. But that's not very realistic. When I go to the doctor and I have a question, I'm not interested in just them telling me, this is what I need to do. I want to know, why do I need to do that? Why is this a problem? How am I going to handle this? And that's the same with almost anything, whether we're looking at an automotive mechanic. I have a flat tire. I can see that. What happened to the tire? Why do I need to get this particular type of tire? It can happen in marketing, where we need to explain what that information is and how it is useful. One of the big questions that Stevenson addressed in the literature review is on the contested form of it, and boils down to a choice between whether preferred learning styles, and typically a student or a person who's done with college or has not yet gotten to college will have a preferred learning style. That learning style may be dictated by what they're more comfortable with, or it may be dictated by a certain disability. But whether that preferred learning style is independent or dependent on cognition and how we think, and specifically, while Stevenson did not actually talk about the tiered learning system of acquire, process, and memory or retention, the context of the articles that she referenced were really inside of the processing information. That once we've acquired that information, how do we process it? I don't know that from a personal viewpoint invalidates VARK, but it does make it more likely to work in a multimodal system. That is, that a system that has multiple frameworks of how we're going to learn this information. Because not only do I have to acquire it, but then I have to process it. And one of the reasons we're not really sure is, how does exactly cognition work? Which is our ability to think. There was a study by, and I'll get these names wrong and I apologize, by Sinha, Kumar, Jahnavi, Patra, and Thatkar in 2018. And it was really looking at whether a unimodal or multimodal system was more effective for students. The unimodal is a single framework of being able to acquire that information and then process it. They were testing the VAK slash VARK model. They had some social interactions inside of that study, and they were also looking at gender between the study. While the study was interesting for a few reasons, one of the more useful things in the study was that it really highlighted what learners preferred. Learners told the researchers how they wanted to learn and how that learning would affect their being able to test or being able to do work on it. As a result of the test, they found that it was most males were more interested in the multimodal system, and it was essentially even for females on either unimodal or multimodal. In 2012, Lee did a quantitative descriptive study addressing an issue that I often have with the learner preferences or learner modalities, depending on what the term is that you're using. And that is that when we learn, it's not just in an academic context. We also have to look at learning from marketing, from business, from social. I'm sure that you have met people who have said, or I should say, you've said of them, you know, this person just doesn't get it. They're not learning what I'm telling them. They're repeating the same mistakes in the business or in their work all the time. It can be frustrating. We learn all the time, but sometimes we don't learn the correct lesson. So a student who comes to me and says, you know, I've been working really hard. I studied 6 hours on this material, and I got the same grade as if I had not studied at all. Well, first, we don't know. If they studied 6 hours and they got a 60 and they feel that they would have done that without it, that may be true, but since we didn't have the test, we don't know that answer. Maybe they would have gotten a 30. So that's issue one. But the second issue is the lesson that they've learned is not to study. And many times when people are studying or they're doing some sort of acquisition of information, it's not always the most efficient ways. Flashcards, for example, are an excellent way to be able to study. But if you're writing paragraphs on the flashcards, and I see students do this all the time in college, they'll put one word on one side, malpractice, and then on the back side, they will put a chapter in little tiny print. That's not helping. It's not helping because of the way that our brains are keyed to learn. We typically learn in groups of 3, 5, and 7. Bell Atlantic actually did some of the very early research in this, and that's why our telephone numbers are 7 words with a 3-digit area code. It's in 3 groups of numbers in the United States, 368, 432, 7268. I apologize if someone has that number. I made them up off the top of my head. And so you have a group of numbers, and that's because it's a little easier to remember. One way that you can test this yourself is when you call someone and they leave a phone number for you. If they leave it and they put breakpoints between those sets of numbers, 369, 423, 7633, you are likely to remember it until you write it down, or you can jot it down while you're doing it. Sometimes I call someone and they leave a phone number for me and they say it really fast with no breaks. 432-653-2000. And I'm like, I have no idea what you just said. And I have to call them back 3 or 4 times to get that message because it didn't repeat it and it was left too fast. For businesses, I don't call them back. If you leave me a message and I can't understand what your number is, I'm not calling you back. Probably didn't want to talk to you anyway. So when you're doing a flashcard and you're leaving, let's say that you are a pictorial, a visual learner, then what you want to do is you want to put down a picture to help you remember it. You want to have a word of 3 to 5 written words. They're just key words of what you need to know. If my front side of the flashcard is RAM, knowing that it's random access memory, that's what RAM stands for, doesn't really help me out. It doesn't tell me what RAM is. But temporary memory, or volatile memory, that will help me out, because that's likely the language the test will use. If they want to know what the acronym is, then maybe I want to have that studied too. But most computer acronyms, you don't really have to worry too much. DOS, for instance, Disk Operating System, it's good. It's a program that launches your computer. That's really what it is. And so leaving just a few words will help out, and it works into the VARK of the read-write, of being able to remember it. Lee found that marketers were choosing their media based on preferred learning styles. And there's specifically in the social media, but Lee looked at radio, television, and the literature review, but the study itself was just on television, which is largely into the visual side of it. For somebody who is a read-write portion of that R, the read and write, they might have found more success in, say, a closed captions, though that was not detailed in the study. And the study did find a correlation between the different learner preferences, that visual, audio, and kinesthetic not only were with the preferences of the learner, but also with the attitude that the learner had about those, which then raises in the question of, is it preferred because we can learn that way easier, or is it preferred because we like to learn that way? And they're not exactly the same thing. If you think, for instance, of a test, we know from multiple research studies that students will typically do better on an essay test than they will on multiple choice. And yet students will flatly deny this. They'll be argumentative at some times. No, that isn't true. But in actual fact, it's probably true for most students. But it doesn't necessarily feel that way. So there is that feature that we have to think about. Okay, well, the good news is, on my game here, we've managed to fix the oxygen problem, largely. The fact that this is carbon dioxide down here is fine, because these plants need carbon dioxide to turn into oxygen. So, in actual fact, I wouldn't mind if this oxygen moved up, and I'll have to address that later, because with this being oxygen down here, some of the plants won't grow. However, my water is starting to look pretty sad, so I really need her to do this. Put a ladder there. across here. And I'm going to need, they can go down 1 or 2 tiles. I'm going to need to put down here a pump and a plumbing system. Just wait one moment here while I come right across here and down. And, whoops. Well, we'll fix that. And over and down. We'll just cancel this order here. Okay, and then I need to get electric. Now, I've got a lot on that electric circuit right now, and I really should not put any more on that electric circuit. But at this moment, with only one person, I don't think I have the power yet, so I'm going to run one circuit. And then I'll have to break it up, so I'm doing a little extra work. And I would like to add, I can't seem to do a straight line with the mouse. All right. And then we're going to go along here and down here, and then I'm going to come straight down to here. So this is the next job that they have to get done. And we have to get it done preferably before we run out of water. If you look at the plumbing panel, this is where water is coming. It's coming down, and then it's coming all the way through, feeding all the plants, and then it's coming out. It takes a little bit of water each time. And so there's a way to calculate it out, where how much water it takes by looking at the water. It takes 19 kilograms per cycle. A cycle is essentially a day. But at this moment, it doesn't really matter about the water because I don't have that much of it here. I'm also not too worried about cleaning up the toilet at the moment, simply because there's only one person. It's more important that we get this stuff built. So we have a interesting little issue here. And I need to get all of this dug out. Okay. We're just going to let things continue here while I finish up. There was a pair of researchers from 2018 that I will not begin to pronounce correctly, so they're down in the link below, but it was published by the Canadian Science and Education, and it was really looking at why VARK is contested as learning modalities, and does that mean it's irrelevant? And I think the answer would be that it's still relevant from the viewpoint of being able to have critical thinking with students. And it's also useful for students to be able to remember information and understand their preferred learning style. If the preferred learning style is visual, then find ways that you're going to be able to get visual information. One example of that is I was teaching a medical law course, and one of the things that I helped some students do is find drawing books that were on the human body. And by coloring in the different organs and different muscles and different parts, you would get to see it, but you would also get to have your kinesthetic through the coloring, and you would also have the visual with being able to see the pictures. So there's multiple ways of doing it, but one of the things that the Canadian Science and Education Journal found is that it cannot be the amount of weight that used to be on VARK perhaps 10 or 15 years ago, because of cultural equivalence, that certain cultures may have a preference towards different learning styles that can skew the learner's preferences. Same with age and gender, and this really isn't known very well yet. For all of the research that is done on learning, we don't necessarily understand how we actually learn and why we learn some things better than others. One of the issues with VARK is that, and it's the same issue that I mentioned last week, is that it's very difficult to generalize information from a test to something that is workable for all students. And I've paused here because I've realized I've made an error here. This has to change. I was looking at it and trying to talk and think at the same time, and it really wasn't working out very well. We'll try that. Actually, while I'm on this, I'm going to do this. Okay. Well, maybe I'm actually going to do this. I prefer not to have this water flood down into my base. If they build it out this way, maybe it will be okay. Okay. One of the other things that the Canadian Journal brought up is that it's not just the culture and age and gender which isn't known, but also the motivation of the student to learn. Certainly motivation is a component of learning, but how much of a component it is questionable. And we talked about this a little bit in the last week's one with operant conditioning, that certain rewards can make people do things that they wouldn't ordinarily want to do from an educational context. I'd also like to point out that in Lee's study, the adaptation of a task changes inside of the VARK relationship. So it may be that VARK is independent of cognition, and we cognate, we think about tasks differently based on what that task is. Or it may be that they're dependent on tasks, and that the relationship of the VARK changes with our motivation. So that really is not known yet about the VARK model. If this is a topic that you find to be useful, or you want to know more about, or would like to see an organized presentation on, probably something like a PowerPoint, let me know in the comments, and I can address it a little bit further out on the study. I'm actually going to spend next week talking about reductionism, which is an ontological premise, which is popularized in sciences currently. And then after that, we'll see. I'm planning to get into the ethics of research, but if someone has leaves a comment and says, I really want to know more about VARK, but rather than have you talk to me about it, is there some sort of visual presentation you can do? I'll come up with something for it. If you have any questions, as always, you can put them down below. If you like the content, you can give me a thumbs up. That just lets me know that you looked at it and you were interested in it. And if you wish to subscribe, that is great. Thank you very much, and I should see you next week, and where we will hope to get up into this area and get this water down, because my water here is starting to look pretty sad. But at least we fixed one problem. And these plants are powering the whole base, partly because we only have one person left. At this point, I would give the odds of this base surviving about a 25%. All right, thank you very much, and take care.